The Omega found a dying baby in the snow. The moment she touched him, the Alpha King's mark appeared. The trees, tall and silent, stood like watchful sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. In the midst of the frozen silence, a lone figure moved with quiet purpose. Lyra, the Omega, wrapped tightly in her worn cloak, walked carefully through the snow. Her boots left deep impressions in the white blanket, each step a slow struggle against the cold that seemed to seep into her very bones. She had always felt at home among the shadows and solitude of the forest. The world beyond was cruel and unforgiving, full of rulers and kings who cared little for those who lived quietly at the edges of their kingdoms. Lyra had learned long ago that the only power she truly held was the ability to heal, to mend wounds, soothe pain, and sometimes, if fortune allowed, save a life. Her skills were modest, her knowledge simple, yet in this vast and merciless land, even simplicity could be a kind of magic. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a faint, strange sound. Lyra paused, her breath visible in the freezing air. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it tugged at her heart. A cry, a sound of life struggling against death. She froze, scanning the snow-covered ground, her heart beating faster. It was impossible for anything to survive here, not for long. The forest was merciless in winter. Even the hardiest of animals fell prey to the cold. And yet there it was again, a faint, fragile cry. She followed the sound, pushing through the thick brush and snow-draped branches. Each step was more difficult than the last. The snow was deep, and the cold seemed to claw at her skin. The cries grew louder, more urgent. And then, at the edge of a frozen clearing, she saw it. A small bundle, half buried in snow, trembling and barely alive. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She knelt beside the infant, brushing away the snow with trembling hands. The baby's skin was pale, almost blue, and its tiny chest rose and fell with shallow, ragged breaths. Lyra's heart clenched. She had seen death before, countless times in the small villages and hidden paths she visited to offer her care. But the helplessness of this tiny life pressed on her like a weight she could not lift. Without thinking, she lifted the baby into her arms, holding him close against her chest. She whispered words of comfort, soft and urgent, though she did not know if he could hear. Her fingers traced the small, delicate form, and then it happened. A burning warmth spread through her palm as she touched the infant's hand. She gasped, jerking back for a moment, but her eyes widened as she saw it. A glowing mark, intricate and strange, appearing on her skin. The mark shimmered with a faint light like fire trapped under ice. It was the symbol of the Alpha King, a sigil said to appear only on those bound to the royal bloodline. Lyra stared at it in disbelief, her mind racing. How could this be? She had heard the legends, whispered in fear by villagers and wanderers alike. The Alpha King was a figure of immense power, feared and revered across the kingdoms. His bloodline was sacred, cursed, and dangerous. And yet now here it was on her hand, glowing as if it had always belonged there. Her heart pounded, a mix of awe and fear. The baby, still shivering in her arms, seemed to stir, opening tiny eyes that were far too old and knowing for one so small. In them, she saw a reflection of something vast and terrifying, a destiny that reached far beyond her understanding. The connection between them was immediate, almost violent in its intensity. She felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the very pulse of her being. This child was not ordinary. He carried a power that could bring salvation or ruin. Lyra pressed the baby closer, wrapping him in her cloak to shield him from the wind. The forest seemed to close in around her, silent now except for the whisper of snow against branches. She shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. She knew with an instinct that had never failed her that this moment had changed everything. The mark on her hand was more than a symbol. It was a promise, a warning, and a chain all at once. She needed to move to find shelter. The forest offered little protection, and she could not linger in one place for long. With the baby pressed against her chest, she began the slow journey through the snow, her eyes scanning for signs of danger. Every sound, every shadow, seemed magnified in the silence. The mark on her hand pulsed faintly, as if sensing something she could not, and in the distance a shadow moved, tall, silent, and purposeful. Lyra froze, her heart racing. She could not tell if it was a hunter, a wolf, or something far worse. The wind carried no familiar scent, no clue. Yet the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was undeniable. She tightened her hold on the baby, whispering soothing words even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. Night fell quickly, a dark curtain that swallowed the world in its cold embrace. Lyra found a small hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree, its branches forming a fragile canopy over her. She sank to the ground, wrapping the baby in her cloak as best she could. The glow from the mark on her hand provided faint warmth, a flickering light in the darkness. She pressed her forehead against the baby's tiny head, closing her eyes. Memories of her own past came unbidden, a childhood spent in hiding, whispers of power she did not understand, the endless cold and loneliness. And now this child, abandoned and fragile, carried the weight of destiny, and with it, the mark that tied her fate to the Alpha King himself. The thought should have terrified her, yet beneath the fear was a strange, unnameable pull. She did not want to let him go. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the soft cries of the baby and the distant howling of the wind. Lyra's eyelids grew heavy, but she dared not sleep for long. The forest was merciless, and the night held secrets that preyed upon the weak and unprepared. Yet as she drifted in and out of consciousness, she felt the mark on her hand pulse once more, warmer this time, like a heartbeat. It was a reminder that the child was not merely a burden, but a beacon, a living key to a fate she could not yet comprehend. In the middle of the night, a sound shattered the fragile quiet. Footsteps, muffled but deliberate, moved through the snow toward her hiding place. Lyra's heart jumped. She clutched the baby tightly, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible. The footsteps stopped, faint but certain, right at the edge of the hollow. A voice, low and commanding, carried on the wind. "Bring him to me or perish." Lyra's breath caught. She pressed herself closer to the baby, her mind spinning. Who was coming for him? Was it the Alpha King himself, or one of the hunters he sent to reclaim what was lost? She did not know, and yet she felt it in her bones. The danger was immediate, real, and deadly. The wind whipped through the hollow, carrying the scent of snow and smoke, of fear and power. Lyra's eyes, wide and searching, met the shadows where the figure had vanished. She whispered to the baby, her voice trembling but firm, "I won't let anyone take you. I promise I'll keep you safe." The baby stirred, tiny fingers brushing against the glowing mark on her hand. A warmth spread through her chest, a reminder that they were bound together now, inseparable by fate or magic. She took a deep breath, gathering the courage she did not feel. The forest was vast and the night was merciless, but she had a purpose now: to protect this child, to survive, and to face whatever darkness was coming. Lyra rose, standing tall despite the cold and fear. Her eyes scanned the forest, every shadow a potential threat. The wind howled louder, carrying with it a sense of urgency and foreboding. Somewhere out there, someone powerful was searching for the child, someone who would not stop. And yet, in the depths of her heart, Lyra felt a spark of defiance, fierce and unyielding. She would not run forever. She would fight in whatever way she could to protect this fragile life. The mark on her hand pulsed in response, faint but insistent, a silent reminder that destiny had chosen her, and there was no turning back. The night stretched on, long and unrelenting, but Lyra did not falter. The snow beneath her boots was deep, the wind sharp, yet she pressed forward, moving carefully through the shadows of the forest. She whispered to the baby, a lullaby she had learned long ago, her voice trembling but steady, "Sleep now, little one. Sleep, for I will keep you safe." And somewhere in the distance beyond the forest, the faintest shadow moved again, relentless and silent. The hunt had begun. The forest never slept. Even under the pale light of the moon, shadows shifted among the snow-laden trees. Lyra moved cautiously, her breath coming in small, visible clouds. The baby was safe in her arms, wrapped tightly in her cloak. Every heartbeat, hers and the baby's, seemed to echo in the vast silence. The glowing mark on her hand pulsed faintly, a silent reminder of the bond between her, the child, and the power it carried. She had walked for hours, seeking refuge in a hidden hollow where no one could find them, but the sense of being watched had not left her. The voice from the night before, low and commanding, still lingered in her mind. Bring him to me or perish. Whoever it was, they were relentless. Lyra knew that now, and yet, despite the fear, there was a spark of determination in her chest. She would protect this child, no matter the cost. The forest began to thin, and the snow turned into a mix of ice and mud. Lyra's boots sank with each step, and the cold gnawed at her fingers. She needed shelter, somewhere she could rest, tend to the baby, and think. Her instincts guided her toward a ruined village she had passed many times on her journeys, a place abandoned long ago when war and famine had swept through. The old stone walls could offer some protection from wind and prying eyes. As she approached the village, a sense of unease settled over her. The ruins were silent, almost too silent. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying with it a chill that felt unnatural. Lyra's hand tightened around the baby, and the glowing mark on her palm pulsed stronger, as if warning her of danger. She froze in the snow, scanning the shadows. It was then she saw him. At the edge of the ruins, standing like a statue carved from darkness, was a man. His figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and impossibly still. He wore a cloak dark as midnight, the edges swirling slightly as if moved by his own presence. His eyes, sharp and commanding, scanned the ruins with a focus that seemed almost painful in its intensity. And then, as if sensing her, he looked directly at her. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the stories, whispered tales of the Alpha King, a man of immense power, feared and revered, and cursed in ways few could understand. His gaze was piercing, a mixture of sorrow and authority, and it seemed to look not only at her but through her, straight into her soul. The baby stirred in her arms, tiny fingers reaching toward the man. The glowing mark on her hand flared, bright and warm. Lyra felt a pull she could not resist, a connection that tied her fate to the Alpha in ways she did not yet comprehend. She wanted to run, yet she could not. Her legs were frozen, not from cold but from the weight of destiny pressing on her chest. The man stepped closer, each movement deliberate and controlled. His eyes never left the baby. "Where is he?" His voice was deep, commanding, yet not cruel. There was something aching in it, something almost human beneath the legend of power and fear. Lyra swallowed hard, tightening her hold on the child. He is safe," she said, her voice trembling. "I found him in the snow. He needs care. Please do not take him from me." The man studied her, his gaze intense. "Do you know what you carry?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper that cut through the wind. "Do you know whose blood flows in him?" Lyra shook her head, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. I don't know. I only know he is alive. And I will not let anyone hurt him." A silence fell between them, heavy and tense. The wind seemed to pause, the forest holding its breath. The man knelt slowly, careful not to startle the baby. Lyra instinctively stepped back, though her hand never left the child. When he reached the baby, he placed a hand near but not touching. The glow on her palm pulsed brighter, as if reacting to his presence. His gaze softened for the briefest moment, and Lyra saw something she had not expected: vulnerability. The Alpha King, the man of legend and fear, carried grief and longing that mirrored her own. "He survived," he whispered almost to himself. He survived." Lyra's heart thudded. She had expected fear, perhaps anger, maybe even violence. But the sorrow in his eyes, it unsettled her. It was the kind of pain that could crush a soul, and yet here he was standing before her, controlled and strong, yet broken in ways she instinctively understood. I can keep him safe," Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. "I will care for him, but I cannot let anyone take him without reason." The man nodded slowly. "And yet you carry a mark," he said, his eyes flicking to her glowing palm. "The mark of the Alpha. It should not appear on anyone but one chosen. Why are you marked?" Lyra stared at her hand, then back at him. "I do not know," she admitted. "The moment I touched him, it appeared. I don't understand it." The Alpha King's gaze softened, but his voice held an edge of worry. "The child is bound to fate. His life is not just his own. Whoever carries him bears the weight of the kingdom's future and of my bloodline." Lyra felt a chill beyond the winter cold. The weight of his words pressed on her chest, heavy and relentless. She had stumbled into a destiny far larger than herself, and yet she could not turn away. She could not abandon the baby. "Then I will bear it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her stomach. "I will protect him, whatever comes." The Alpha King studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well," he said, his tone softening. "But you must understand, you are not merely protecting a child. You are protecting a legacy, a line cursed and blessed, tied to power beyond imagining. And there are those who will not forgive what has been lost." Lyra tightened her hold on the baby, her gaze unwavering. "Let them come. I will not let them take him." For a moment the wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper that neither of them understood. It sounded like voices, low and urgent, moving through the ruins. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. "They are near," he said. "I can feel them, shadows that do not belong to this world. You must move quickly." Without another word, he stood and extended his hand toward her. Hesitation gripped her, but the pull of fate was undeniable. She placed the baby carefully in his arms, feeling the warmth of his presence, the strength and sorrow radiating from him. The mark on her hand pulsed brightly once, as if acknowledging their shared bond. "Come," he said, his voice firm. "We must leave before they find us." Lyra followed, moving through the ruins, her eyes scanning every shadow. The forest beyond seemed darker now, more alive with hidden threats. Snow swirled around them as they moved, and every step carried the weight of urgency and fear. She felt the strange connection between herself and the child deepen, binding her fate to the Alpha King in ways she did not yet understand. As they reached the edge of the village, a shape moved in the shadows, fast, silent, and deliberate. Lyra froze, and the Alpha King's hand tightened around the baby. The figure stepped forward, revealing nothing, yet its presence was undeniable. The wind carried a voice, faint but chilling. "The child belongs to the Alpha. Hand him over or be destroyed." Lyra's heart raced. She glanced at the Alpha King, whose eyes burned with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "Do not fear," he whispered to her. "I will not let them harm you. You are marked for a reason. You are part of this fate, whether you wish it or not." The shadow in the distance advanced, silent as snow falling from the trees. The Alpha King's grip on the baby tightened, and the glow from Lyra's hand flared, casting light on the snow around them. For the first time, she felt the bond fully, the shared destiny, the connection of blood, fate, and power. They were tied together now, unbreakable in ways that terrified and exhilarated her at once. Lyra drew a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We will not run forever," she said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled. "Whatever comes, I will fight. I will protect him." The Alpha King nodded, his eyes distant, as if seeing things she could not. "Good," he said softly, "because this is only the beginning. The forest holds secrets and shadows that hunger for the child. We must be ready." And in the darkness beyond, the whispering shadows moved closer, patient, silent, and relentless. The hunt had begun, and neither Lyra nor the Alpha King would escape it unscathed. The forest had grown darker with each passing hour. Shadows clung to the trees like living things, and the wind carried whispers that seemed not entirely natural. Lyra moved with care, her eyes darting through the night, every sense alert. The baby, wrapped snugly in the Alpha King's cloak, slept lightly, tiny fingers curling in his rest. She could feel the subtle warmth of the glowing mark on her hand, a pulse that seemed to echo the baby's heartbeat. The Alpha King, Kale, moved silently beside her. His presence was powerful, commanding, yet tempered by a quiet vulnerability that only Lyra could sense. She had begun to understand something about him, that his strength was not only in his power but in the weight of responsibility he carried. Every step he took seemed measured, deliberate, and somehow protective, as though the very air around him recognized the life he guarded. "You must understand," Kale said quietly, his voice cutting through the whispering wind. "The child's bloodline carries a curse older than the kingdom itself. It is bound to our family, to the Alpha line, and to the power we wield. This curse, it does not forgive mistakes." Lyra's hand tightened around the baby. "I do not understand fully," she admitted. "I only know that I must protect him. That is all I know." Kale's eyes softened, though the shadows in them remained. "That is enough for now. But the curse is not simple. It watches, it waits, and it can sense weakness. Your bond with the child, it has awakened something in the forest. Something old, something patient." The words made her stomach tighten. She had sensed it. The forest was alive, watching, and not entirely friendly. She had always trusted her instincts, and now they screamed at her that danger was closer than ever. The shadows, she realized, were not merely the absence of light. They were sentients, drawn by the bloodline the baby carried. They moved through the forest cautiously, avoiding the paths where snow was disturbed by others. The trees became thicker, more twisted, their roots like grasping hands. Lyra's breath came in small clouds, her heart beating faster with each step. The baby stirred slightly and she whispered softly, "Do not be afraid, I am here. We are safe, I promise." Kale's hand brushed hers briefly as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but the warmth it brought was undeniable. Lyra felt a strange shiver pass through her, a mixture of fear, longing, and the undeniable pull of the bond that tied her to this child and to the Alpha King. They reached a clearing, and there, amidst the snow and shadow, stood the remnants of an old temple. Its stone walls were cracked and blackened as though touched by fire long ago. Kale gestured toward it. "We will rest there for the night. It will provide some shelter, and I can attempt to shield us from the forest's eyes." Lyra nodded, setting the baby down carefully. The child's tiny fingers brushed her hand, and the mark pulsed once more, warm and reassuring. She felt a connection to him stronger than before, a tether that was impossible to ignore. Inside the temple, the air was heavy and cold, filled with the scent of moss and old stone. Shadows stretched across the walls, flickering as the wind seeped through the broken roof. Kale knelt beside the baby, his fingers brushing lightly against the small form. He whispered something she could not hear, a quiet promise or prayer. Lyra watched him, her heart a mixture of awe and caution. There was a weight to him, a gravity that drew her in even as it warned her to stay distant. She had always been solitary, accustomed to trusting no one. And yet now, beside him, she felt something new, the stirrings of connection, of shared purpose. "Lyra," Kale said suddenly, his voice low, "you must understand the danger. The curse of my bloodline is not just a story told to frighten children. It is real. It feeds on fear and weakness. It will test you, test him, and test us together." Her eyes met his, steady and determined. "Then we will face it together," she said. "I will not let it harm him. I will not let it take him from us." Kale's gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the shadowed depths. "Good," he said, "because you are now part of this bloodline, whether you like it or not. The mark you carry, it binds you to him, and to me. That bond may be the only thing that can save us." The night stretched long. Outside, the forest seemed restless, alive with invisible eyes. Lyra kept the baby close, her mind racing with questions she could not answer. What was the curse? How had it survived so long? And most importantly, could they survive it? Suddenly, a movement outside caught her attention. Shadows shifted unnaturally, slipping through the trees like smoke. Kale's hand tightened around the baby instinctively. He rose slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness. "They are here," he said quietly. "The forest, the curse, it sends its watchers, be ready." Lyra felt her pulse quicken. She had faced danger before, but this was different. This was not simply life or death. This was the weight of destiny, of magic, of a past she could barely understand, pressing down upon them. From the shadows, figures emerged, not fully human, not fully shadow, their shapes flickering and wavering as if the night itself had come alive. Lyra's breath caught, and she instinctively stepped closer to Kale. "They will not harm the child if we do not falter," Kale said, his voice steady. "But any sign of weakness and they will strike." The shadows circled them, moving with a patience that was almost maddening. Kale's eyes glowed faintly, a reflection of the power that ran through his bloodline. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, a pressure that pressed on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to remain calm. As the night deepened, Kale began a low chant, words in a language she did not recognize. The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing as if burned by the sound. Lyra felt a strange warmth emanate from him, from the mark on her hand, from the bond she shared with the child. It was as if their combined presence pushed back against the darkness. Minutes stretched into hours. The shadows writhed and twisted, testing, probing, but unable to breach the barrier Kale had formed. Finally, as the first pale light of dawn crept through the broken roof, the figures retreated, dissolving into the forest like mist. Lyra sank to the ground, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. The baby stirred, opening his eyes and gazing at her. She smiled weakly, brushing a strand of hair from his tiny face. "It's okay," she whispered. "You are safe for now." Kale looked at her, his expression unreadable. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "The curse will not rest. It will test us again and again. And the deeper your bond with the child grows, the more you will be drawn into it." Lyra nodded slowly, understanding the truth of his words. She had felt the pull already, the connection, the bond, the unspoken promise that tied her to the child and to Kale himself. She could not escape it, nor would she want to. And yet, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a spark of something else began to grow. Trust, connection, even something she dared not name, a feeling that stirred in her chest whenever Kale's eyes met hers. She pushed it aside for now, focusing instead on the baby, on survival, on the immediate dangers that surrounded them. But the mark on her hand pulsed once more, a reminder that their destinies were intertwined. The child was the key, the curse was the test, and they, Lyra and Kale, were bound together in a story that was only beginning. As they prepared to move deeper into the forest, Lyra felt a flicker of fear and anticipation. The curse of the bloodline was real. The shadows would return, and yet she was no longer alone. She had the Alpha King beside her, and she had a purpose that was larger than herself. The forest seemed to shift as they stepped forward, trees parting slightly, guiding them toward an uncertain future. And in the distance, a voice, faint and melodic, carried through the wind. "The path is set. The bond is sealed. Beware, for the next trial comes with fire and shadow." Lyra tightened her grip on the baby, feeling the warmth of life and hope in her arms. Kale's presence at her side was steady, protective, and unyielding. Together they moved forward into the unknown, toward a destiny written in blood, magic, and the fragile promise of redemption. The shadows watched, waiting. The curse stirred. And the bond between Omega, Alpha, and child grew stronger, a light in the darkness, and a beacon for what was yet to come. The wind tore through the frozen peaks of the northern mountains, carrying the scent of ice and ancient stones. The forest below lay buried in snow, silent except for the whispers of the wind. Lyra clutched the baby close to her chest, feeling the warmth of life against the chill that threatened to seep through even her thick cloak. The glowing mark on her hand pulsed steadily, as if calling her forward, guiding her toward the destiny that had been set the moment she touched him. Kale, the Alpha King, moved beside her like a shadow of strength and authority. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the landscape ahead, searching for signs of the curse that haunted his bloodline. His presence was both comforting and frightening, a reminder of the power that surrounded them and the danger that could strike at any moment. "We are close," Kale said, his voice low, carrying a weight that made Lyra's heart tighten. "The source of the curse lies at the peak. There we will either break it or lose everything." Lyra swallowed hard. She had come to understand something over the past days. The curse was not simply an enemy to fight. It was a force that tested hearts, exposed fears, and demanded sacrifice. The baby stirred slightly, tiny hands reaching out, as if sensing the storm that awaited them. She whispered softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "We will protect you," she said, "no matter what comes." The climb was treacherous. Snow and ice shifted beneath their boots, and the wind tugged at their cloaks like unseen hands. Every step required careful balance, and every shadow seemed alive with intent. Lyra felt the pull of the glowing mark on her hand, guiding her upward, urging her to keep moving despite exhaustion. As they reached a plateau, the ruins of an ancient altar appeared, half buried in snow. Blackened stones, etched with runes of power long forgotten, rose from the ground like jagged teeth. The air was thick with magic, heavy, oppressive, and alive. Lyra felt the baby stir again, and the warmth of his tiny body pressed against hers. Kale stepped forward, his gaze locked on the altar. "This is where it began," he said. "The first alpha, the first curse. The spirit of the line feeds on weakness and fear. It will try to turn you against me, against each other." Lyra's heart pounded. She had seen shadows before, had faced the night, but this felt alive, sentient, and dangerous. The snow around the altar shifted unnaturally, and a dark shape began to rise, coalescing from mist and shadow. It had no clear form, yet it radiated power, anger, and ancient sorrow. "I will not let it harm him," Lyra whispered fiercely, pressing the baby closer. The mark on her hand flared, bright and warm, as if recognizing the urgency of the moment. The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through dead trees, and words formed, twisted and ancient. "The bloodline must pay. Weakness will destroy all. Surrender or be consumed." Kale's eyes narrowed. "It is testing us," he said. "It wants fear, it wants doubt. You must not give it either." Lyra's hands shook slightly, but she squared her shoulders. "We will not give it anything," she said. "We are stronger together. You cannot take him. You cannot take us." The shadow writhed, expanding, swirling around the altar. It reached toward them with tendrils of darkness, probing, searching for vulnerability. Kale stepped in front of the baby, placing a protective hand over Lyra's shoulder. The warmth of his presence grounded her, steadying her resolve. "You must channel your bond," Kale said urgently. "Do not fight it with strength alone. Let your connection to him, to the child, be your shield." Lyra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She focused on the baby, on the life in her arms, on the warmth of his tiny heartbeat. She felt the glowing mark pulse against her palm, and with it, a surge of energy, fragile yet fierce. She placed her hands gently on the altar, feeling the ancient magic thrumming beneath the snow. The shadow recoiled slightly, sensing the defiance, sensing the bond that tied Lyra, Kale, and the child together. It hissed again, louder and angrier, reaching higher, twisting faster, its dark energy pressing down on them like a physical weight. Kale stepped beside her, placing his hand over hers on the altar. The warmth of his touch intertwined with hers, the power of the Alpha and Omega merging with the life of the child. Lyra felt a wave of energy flow through her, through the baby, through Kale, and into the altar itself. Light began to push back the shadow, faint at first, then growing brighter, warmer, until the darkness seemed to shriek in frustration. You are stronger than fear, Kale said, his voice resonating with authority and hope. Stronger than doubt. Let it go, Lyra. Let it see that we will not break. Lyra nodded, focusing every thought on protection, on love, on the unshakable bond they shared. The shadow twisted violently, surging upward, yet the combined force of their hearts, their courage, and their connection formed a barrier that the darkness could not penetrate. The baby stirred, tiny fingers reaching for both of them, and the light from the mark on her hand expanded, wrapping them all in a protective glow. The shadow screamed, a soundless roar that seemed to shake the mountains, and then it began to unravel. Pieces of darkness peeled away, dissipating into the wind, until the altar and the snow were bathed in pure, soft light. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a calm that was almost sacred. Lyra sank to her knees, exhausted but alive. The baby cooed softly, his tiny face lifting toward hers, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Kale knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder, his gaze gentle and filled with an emotion she could not yet name. "It is done," he said quietly. "The curse, it is broken." Lyra looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Are we safe now?" Kale nodded, though the shadows of the past still lingered in his eyes. "Safe for now. The curse no longer binds the child, but our path is just beginning. The bloodline carries history, responsibility, and power. We are part of it now." She nodded slowly, glancing down at the baby in her arms. The tiny life was the center of it all, fragile yet unbreakable, a symbol of hope in a world that had known so much darkness. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her, deeper than the cold or fear, a warmth born of connection, trust, and the shared triumph over the shadow that had haunted them. Kale reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lyra," he said softly, "you have been brave. Stronger than I imagined. You have risked everything for him, for us." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, searching his eyes, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel the bond that had been growing between them. Fear, longing, and respect intertwined, forming something delicate yet unbreakable. I could not let anything happen to him," she said. "I could not turn away." Kale's expression softened further, and he leaned closer, not to claim but to acknowledge, to share the unspoken understanding between them. "Then we are bound," he whispered. "By fate, by choice, by everything that matters." The baby stirred once more, tiny hands curling around their fingers. Lyra felt the pulse of the mark on her hand, warm and steady, and she realized that their bond was no longer just a connection of destiny. It was love, not just for the child but for each other, a quiet, growing trust forged in the heart of danger and darkness. They stayed there for a long moment, surrounded by the stillness of the mountains, the purity of snow, and the soft glow of magic that had once been darkness. The world was quiet, but it felt alive in a way that was different, hopeful, fragile, and real. Lyra looked up at Kale, her voice soft but firm. "Our story, it begins now," she said. "No more shadows, no more fear. We protect him and we protect each other." Kale's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Yes," he said, "together, always." The wind carried their words across the mountains, a quiet promise echoed by the peaks and the forests below. The baby cooed again, tiny fingers brushing their hands, and for the first time since the journey began, Lyra allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. The curse had been broken, the bond had been sealed, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. They stood together, facing the rising sun, its light painting the snow in gold and pink. Lyra felt the warmth of life, of hope, and of love coursing through her. The mountains, the forest, and the sky seemed to celebrate their triumph, a silent witness to the courage and connection that had overcome centuries of shadow. And as they descended the mountain, Lyra held the baby close, Kale beside her. She knew, no matter what trials awaited, they were no longer alone. The Omega, the Alpha, and the child were united. Bound by destiny, by courage, and by a love that had been tested in darkness and emerged unbroken. The forest was quiet now, but somewhere, faintly, whispers lingered not of fear but of hope. The journey was only beginning.